Hey guys, tonight we are going to cast off the lines and set sail into some very, very dark waters. We're exploring the Golden Age of Piracy, but we're leaving the swashbuckling fantasies of Hollywood on the shore. Instead, we're diving headfirst into the grimy, disgusting, and truly miserable reality of what it was like to be a common pirate. Let's be honest, if you were suddenly dropped onto one of these ships, you probably wouldn't last the first day before you started begging to go back to your desk job. It was that bad. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Your support truly means the world. And as always, I love to see where you're all listening from. Let me know in the comments what city you're in and what time it is for you right now. It's always amazing to see this little community stretching all across the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The salt spray feels like 1,000 tiny needles against your face, and the damp cold has seeped deep into your bones. You are huddled against the grimy railing of a merchant ship, a vessel that has been your floating prison for months. You can't remember the last time you felt properly warm or dry. Every inch of your body aches. A dull, persistent throb from endless, back-breaking labor. This isn't the life of adventure you were promised. This is servitude. Your captain is a man whose cruelty is matched only by his greed. The food, when it comes, is barely fit for an animal's stale. Rock-hard biscuits that you have to tap on the deck to shake the weevils out of, and meat so heavily salted it burns your throat, yet somehow still tastes like it's on the verge of rot. The pay a pittance, and most of it is docked for minor infractions. The misplaced rope, a moment's hesitation to a shouted order, it all comes out of your pocket. You're not earning a living, you're just accumulating debt. This is the reality for thousands of men in the early 18th century. Life on a naval or merchant vessel was brutal. The discipline was savage. The boatswain's whistle is a sound you've come to dread, a shrill prelude to a torrent of abuse or the sting of a rope sent across your back. You watch men around you sicken, their bodies wasting away from poor nutrition and relentless toil, treated as less than human, entirely disposable. And maybe you didn't even choose this life. Perhaps one night, while having a quiet meal in a port tavern, you were a victim of the press. Press gangs, legalized kidnappers for the crown, roamed the docks, grabbing any able-bodied man they could find to fill the ever-hungry belly of the Royal Navy. One moment you were a free man, the next you were being dragged onto a ship, bound for years of forced service with no hope of escape. This practice was a well-known terror of the age, the constant threat that loomed over every coastal town. So you stand here, on the deck of this miserable ship, staring out at the vast, indifferent ocean. You are trapped. The land represents a life of poverty and powerlessness, and the sea has become a wooden cage of despair. There are no good options. But then, one morning, something appears on the horizon. At first, it's just a speck, but it grows larger, faster than your lumbering merchant vessel could ever move. It's a swoop, sleek and predatory. As it draws closer, a flag is raised. It's not a national ensign, it's stark black, and on it, a symbol that makes the blood in your veins run cold, yet also sparks a strange, forbidden flicker of hope. They skull. Panic erupts on your deck. The officers are shouting, trying to muster a defense, but you and the other sailors just stare. You've heard the stories of pirates. They're painted as monsters, devils of the sea, but you've also heard other whispers that on a pirate ship, the crew shares the plunder, that they elect their own captain, that a man is judged by his skill and courage, not his birth. They call it the Brotherhood of the Coast. Historians to this day are locked in a debate about how many pirates were truly volunteers. When a pirate ship captured a merchant vessel, they would often force men from the captured crew to join them. For some, this was surely a terrifying ordeal, But for others, was it really being forced, or was it a convenient narrative? A story they could tell if they were ever captured by the authorities. A way to plead for their lives. I had no choice, they'd say. They would have killed me otherwise. The truth is likely somewhere in the murky middle. A desperate choice made in a desperate moment. For you, in this moment, it doesn't feel like a choice between good and evil. It feels like a choice between a slow death and a chance, however slim, that life. You look at your captain, his face pale with fear. You look at your fellow sailors, their eyes wide with a mixture of terror and something else. Calculation. The pirate ship is now close enough for you to hear their shouts, a wild and chaotic sound, so different from the rigid, fearful silence of your own vessel. They are not offering you a career. They are offering you an escape, a gamble, and as the first grappling hook bites into the railing of your ship, you have to decide where your loyalties lie, with the cage you know, or the terrifying freedom that awaits just a few feet across the water. The fight, if you can even call it that, is over in minutes. It's not a duel of clashing swords and witty banter. It's a wave of brutal efficiency. The pirates swarm over the rails, a screaming, terrifying mob. They move with a purpose your own crew, paralyzed by fear and long-simmering resentment, simply cannot match. A few of the officers try to put up a fight and are cut down without ceremony. The rest of the merchant crew, including you, wisely throw down any pretense of resistance. You stand there, hands raised, as the pirates secure the vessel. A man with a face like a roadmap of scars and a surprisingly level gaze approaches you. He isn't the captain. You can tell the captain by his slightly finer coat and the air of command he carries while directing the plunder. This man is the quartermaster, a figure you will soon learn is arguably more powerful in the day-to-day life of the ship. While the captain is the absolute commander in battle, the quartermaster is the law. He represents the crew's interests, distributes the rations, and doles out justice. He looks you up and down, his eyes lingering on your calloused hands. Know how to handle a line? Boy, he asks, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. You nod, unable to find your voice. He grunts, a sound of neutral assessment. Tired of tack and orders from powdered wig fools, you nod again, more emphatically this time. He gives a slight, almost imperceptible smile. Good. We've got an open spot. Welcome aboard. Now get over there and help them with the cargo. Just like that, you've crossed the line. You clamber over the railing, your feet touching the deck of the pirate sloop. And that's when it hits you. This smell. It's a physical presence. An invisible wall of stench, so thick you can almost taste it. It's nothing like the familiar, albeit unpleasant, smells of your old ship. This is a different beast entirely. It's a complex symphony of rot. The top note is the overpowering odor of unwashed humanity. Dozens of men packed into a small space, sweating under the Caribbean sun, their clothes stiff with salt, grime, and cheap rum. Beneath that is the cloying, sweetens our smell of stale wine and spilled grog, a permanent sticky residue on the wooden planks. But the base note, the one that anchors the entire disgusting perfume, is the bilge. Down in the belly of the ship, in the lowest part of the hull, is a stagnant soup of seawater, leaking grog, urine, vomit, rainwater, and anything else that has trickled down through the cracks. It's a black, greasy sludge that sloshes back and forth with every roll of the ship, releasing a foul, sulfurous gas that permeates every timber. It's the smell of decay itself. You'll learn that crews occasionally tried to combat this by a process called sweetening the bilge, which involved burning pitch or dropping hot cannonballs into the muck to sear it, creating a plume of acrid smoke. It was a desperate, and largely useless, attempt to replace one horrible smell with a slightly more tolerable one. You look at your new crewmates. They are not the dashing rogues of storybooks. They are a rough, haggard collection of men from every corner of the Atlantic. You see faces weathered by sun and sea, skin etched with scars, tattoos crudely inked with gunpowder and urine. Some are missing fingers, an eye, or even a leg, replaced with a crude wooden peg. They move with a weariness that belies their ferocious reputation. They are not monsters. They are just men, hardened and broken by a world that had no place for them. You listen to them speak, a chaotic babble of dialects, contrary to the Armady accent you might expect a fiction largely invented by a single actor, Robert Newton. In the 1950s, their speech is a messy, almost incomprehensible mix. You hear the lilting tones of the Irish, the thick burr of the English West Country, the guttural sounds of Dutch, and the rhythmic cadence of freed African slaves who found a strange sort of equality here. Historians still puzzle over the exact linguistics of a pirate ship, but it was certainly a melting pot of voices, a crude maritime creole forged in the crucible of their shared, violent lives. There was no single pirate accent, only the combined accents of the dispossessed. The quartermaster shoves a rope into your hands. Stop gawking and make yourself useful. Secure these barrels. The work is just as hard as on the merchant ship. The sun is just as hot. Your new life of freedom begins. Ironically, with the same back-breaking labor you thought you were escaping. The only difference is the flag flying from the mast and the soul-crushing stench that now fills your lungs with every breath. The initial thrill of the escape is already fading, replaced by a grim realization. You haven't stepped into a world of adventure. You've just stepped onto a floating slum, and this is now your home. The sun dips below the horizon, painting the sky in fiery streaks of orange and purple. The day's brutal work of transferring cargo from the captured merchantman is finally done. Your muscles scream in protest, a familiar ache you hoped to leave behind. Your stomach rumbles with a hunger that feels like a hollow pit. You watch as your former ship, now stripped of anything valuable, is set ablaze, a common practice to prevent it from being used to report the pirate's location. It burns like a giant funeral pyre on the dark water, a final, definitive severing of your old life. Now, it's time to find your place for the night. You ask one of the older, slightly less intimidating pirates where the crew quarters are. He just laughs, a harsh, barking sound, and points a grubby finger at the open deck. Quarters, you're looking at him, friend. You stare, confused. Surely, he's joking, but as you look around, you see the grim reality. The crew doesn't have bunks or cabins. There is no designated sleeping area. The only enclosed spaces below deck are the captain's cabin, a small, cramped room he often shares with his officers, the powder magazine, and the hold, which is crammed to the ceiling with barrels of water, salted meat, munitions, and now, your freshly acquired plunder. There is no below decks for you. Your personal space, you quickly realize, is whatever patch of deck you can claim for the night. You watch as the other men simply find a spot, huddling between cannons, curling up against the ship's bulwarks, or wedging themselves into coils of rope to avoid rolling around with the motion of the ship. Their beds are the hard, unforgiving wooden planks. Their pillows are their own arms, a spare bit of canvas, or nothing at all. This was the standard for most ships of the era, not just pirate vessels. Hammocks, while they existed, were a naval innovation that was only slowly being adopted. Even on a Royal Navy ship, men slept on the gun decks, crammed side by side. But a pirate ship was often even more crowded. A typical pirate crew might number 80, yachting, or even up to 200 men on a vessel designed to be crewed by a fraction of that number. More men meant a stronger fighting force, but it also meant a severe lack of living space. You find a relatively clear spot near the mainmast, trying to stay out of the way of the men on watch. The deck is hard and splintery. The night air grows cold, and the dampness from the sea seems to creep up from the wood itself. You have one thin, wool blanket to your name, the only personal possession you manage to bring with you. It does little to ward off the chill. You lie there, acutely aware of everything around you, the snores and wheezes of the men sleeping just inches away, the constant, rhythmic creaking of the ship's timbers, a sound like an old man's groaning bones, the gentle, incessant slap of water against the hull, then the men, your ease surrounded by strangers, men whose capacity for sudden violence you've already witnessed. You sleep with one eye open, a tense, shallow rest that offers little real comfort. And then there's the weather. If the night is calm, it's merely uncomfortable. But if a squall blows in, it's a new level of misery. Rain lashes down, drenching you on your meager blanket in seconds. The deck becomes slick and treacherous. Waves crash over the side, sending torrents of cold, salt water washing across your bed. In such conditions, sleep is impossible. You simply have to huddle in your soaking clothes, shivering, and wait for the storm to pass, praying you don't get washed overboard. There is a strange and debated bit of pirate lore about maggot age, a formal union between two male pirates. Historians still argue about the true nature of this arrangement. Some see it as a purely practical, economic partnership, where two men would agree to share their plunder and inherit each other's belongings if one of them died. It was a form of sailor's insurance. Others argue that, in this exclusively male environment, these bonds were often deeply emotional and, in some cases, romantic, forming a kind of same-sex marriage. Whatever its true nature, it's likely that men in such a partnership would at least have an ally to watch their back, someone to share a patch of deck with, offering a small island of security in this chaotic world. But you have no such partner. You are alone, as you lie there, trying to find a position where a stray splinter isn't digging into your back. You realize the profound lack of privacy. Every aspect of your life, eating, working, sleeping, being sick, will be performed in public, under the constant scrutiny of your crewmates. The romantic notion of a pirate's freedom feels like a bitter joke. You've escaped the tyranny of one captain only to be thrown into the suffocating, relentless intimacy of the crowd. There are no doors to close, no walls to hide behind. Your entire world has shrunk to the dimensions of this ship, and even on this vast ocean, you will never, ever be alone. The first light of dawn brings no relief, only a gray, hazy illumination of the squalor around you. You wake up stiff, cold, and with a foul taste in your mouth. The need to relieve yourself, which you've been putting off all night, is now urgent. You look around for a latrine, a hood, any designated spot. You see nothing. You discreetly ask another sailor, a man with a missing ear and teeth stained black from what you assume is tobacco, where the toilet is. He gives you that same look of pitying amusement you're starting to get used to. He points vaguely towards the bow of the ship. The whole world's your privy, mate. Just make sure you're downwind. HES not being metaphorical, you make your way to the front of the ship, to the beak head, which is the pointed part of the hull that juts out over the water, right below the bowsprit. Here, you find a series of gratings or simply carved holes in the woodwork. This, you learn, is the head, so named because it was located at the head of the ship. There are no stalls, no partitions, no privacy whatsoever. Men simply squat over the openings, in full view of anyone else on deck, and do their business directly into the churning sea below. It's a precarious and disgusting arrangement. In rough weather, waves crash over the bow, drenching the area and anyone using it. A sudden lurch of the ship could easily send a man tumbling into the ocean. The smell is, predictably, awful, a permanent miasma of human waste that clings to the front of the vessel. And this is the best case scenario. On many smaller, cruder pirate ships, there wasn't even this basic facility. The rule was simple: find a spot along the rail, hang yourself over the edge, and hope for the best. This led to the sides of the ship being constantly streaked with filth. In the chaos of a storm or a battle, when men were too busy or too scared to make it to the rail, they would simply relieve themselves wherever they stood. The scuppers' drains along the edge of the deck, designed to let water run off, would often be clogged with a foul slurry of waste. You begin to understand the source of the ship's pervasive stench on a much deeper level. It's not just the bilge water or the unwashed bodies. It's the unavoidable, ever-present reality of human excrement. The ship is, quite literally, a floating cesspool. Personal hygiene is a concept that has been completely abandoned. Fresh water is far too precious for washing. It's strictly rationed for drinking, and even then, it's barely potable. The water is stored in wooden casks, where it quickly becomes stagnant, growing a slimy green layer of algae. You'll see men dip their cups into the barrel and pull out water, thick with wriggling larvae, which they call water bears. They just drink it down. Dehydration is a far greater threat than a few bugs. So, no one washes, not their bodies, not their clothes. You wear the same set of clothes day in, day out, until they literally fall apart from wear. Salt and grime. Your skin is coated in a permanent layer of sweat, dirt, and dirt. Your hair is matted and greasy, and soon you notice the itching. Lice. They are an inevitability. They live in the seams of your clothes, in your hair, on your body. Everyone has them. You see men sitting in the sun, picking the lice off each other's clothes and crushing them between their thumbnails with a satisfying pop. It's a common, social activity, like grooming apes. It's a losing battle. Of course, for everyone you kill, 100 more are waiting. The itching becomes a constant, maddening companion. There's a fascinating, stomach-churning detail that some maritime, historical sources mention ship's biscuits, or hardtack, were so notoriously infested with weevils that sailors developed a specific etiquette for eating them. They would tap the biscuit on the table in the dark. Why in the dark? Because it was considered better form not to see the sheer number of insects that crawled out before you took a bite. This simple tradition speaks volumes about the level of infestation they considered normal. Historians debate the full extent to which pirates understood the connection between filth and disease. The germ theory of disease was still more than a century away. They certainly understood that a foul smell often accompanied sickness, but they believed it was the smell itself, the miasma or bad air, that caused the illness, not microscopic organisms. This is why they would sweeten the bilge with fire and smoke, believing that replacing the bad air with different air would prevent disease. It was a tragically flawed understanding that meant they never addressed the root cause of their problems, the utter lack of sanitation. As you stand there, looking out at the endless blue ocean, you feel a profound sense of being unclean, a deep, inescapable dirtiness that goes beyond the skin. The romance of the seas a lie. The reality is filth. The ship is not a vessel of freedom, it's a petri dish, and with every roll and pitch, it's just stirring its toxic, floating culture, with you and your new crewmate strapped right in the middle of it. Your stomach has been a knot of hunger for what feels like days. Since joining the pirate crew, you've been subsisting on scraps and a gnawing anxiety. Finally, the quartermaster declares it's time for the day's main ration to be distributed. You line up with the others, a tin plate your new, prized possession in hand. Your expectations are low, but what you receive manages to fall well below them. A man with a ladle drops a couple of hard, grayish-brown squares onto your plate. They look like weathered paving stones. This is hardtack, also known as a ship's biscuit. It's your new bread, your new staple, the foundation of your diet. You pick one up. It's unexpectedly heavy and dense, and when you tap it with your knuckle, it makes a sound like knocking on wood. You watch a veteran pirate next to you. He doesn't try to bite it directly. Instead, he puts the biscuit on the deck, raises his heel, and stomps on it. It shatters into a few jagged pieces. He gestures for you to do the same. You follow his lead, and with a jarring crack, your biscuit breaks apart. You pick up a piece and examine it. The interior is a dry, coarse, fluory substance, and riddled with little black specks. You think at first it's pepper or some kind of spice. Then one of the specks moves. They are weevils, little black beetles, no bigger than a grain of rice. crawling sluggishly through the labyrinth of tiny tunnels they've bored into your food. This is what the sailors called maggot-y bread or wormy biscuits. The man next to you just shrugs. Extra protein, he grunts, and pops a piece into his mouth. Bugs and all. This is the reality of food preservation at sea. Hardtack was made from a simple recipe: flour, water, and sometimes a bit of salt. It was baked multiple times until it was completely devoid of moisture, creating a biscuit as hard as a rock. In theory, this made it incredibly durable, capable of lasting for years. In practice, the barrels they were stored in were rarely airtight. Moisture would inevitably seep in, and along with it came the insect eggs. It was a near certainty that any biscuit more than a few months old would be teeming with weevils and their larvae. You try to bite into a piece. It's like trying to chew on a rock. You can feel your teeth straining against it. The only way to make it edible is to soak it. You see some men dipping it into their daily ration of grog rum diluted with water or wine, letting it soften into a mush. Others soak it in whatever broth or stew is available, turning it into a lumpy porridge. You find a cup of brackish water and drop a piece in. It sinks to the bottom and slowly begins to absorb the liquid, turning the water cloudy. After a few minutes, you fish it out. It's now a soggy, pulpy mess, but at least it's chewable. You close your eyes. Try not to think about the insects you can no longer see, and swallow. It tastes of stale flour, salt, and of faint, musty bitterness. This is your sustenance. There's a curious detail that food historians have uncovered about hardtack. Well, it was universally reviled for its hardness and infestation. Its durability was legendary. In fact, some biscuits from the Napoleonic Wars and even the American Civil War have survived and are now in museums. They are still, by all accounts, rock hard. There's an old sailor's joke that some hardtack was so tough it was used as shrapnel in cannons, though that's likely just a bit of gallows humor. The academic debate here doesn't concern the existence of the weevils. That's a well-documented fact. Instead, historians argue about the crew's attitude towards them. Was the extra protein comment just a cynical joke to cope with the disgusting reality, or did some sailors, pushed to the brink of starvation, genuinely come to see the bugs as a minor nutritional supplement? It's a question about the psychology of survival. When you're hungry enough, what was once repulsive can become merely food. As you force down your soggy, weevil-filled biscuit, you realize the profound monotony of the diet you're about to endure. This isn't just a meal, it's every meal. Day after day, week after week, the same hard, tasteless, crawling brick of baked flour. Sometimes it will be supplemented with a bit of salted meat, but the hardtack is the bedrock of your existence. The freedom you thought you were choosing feels more and more like a trap. On the merchant ship, the food was terrible. Here, it's just as bad. But now you have to share it with 100 other hungry men, all of whom are armed and desperate. You are not a dashing adventurer. You are just another hungry mouth on a ship where food is a constant source of tension. And the most reliable thing on the menu is the bug that crawls out of your bread. A few days later, a special occasion is announced by the quartermaster. They've decided to break out the meat. A palpable excitement triples through the crew. A welcome break from the mind-numbing diet of hardtack. You imagine a roasted joint of pork, or perhaps some hearty salted beef. Your mouth waters at the prospect, a Pavlovian response to the mere idea of something other than dry flour. Two men hoist a large wooden barrel onto the deck. With the grunt and the sharp crack of a hatchet, they pry the lid open. A strange, faintly metallic and sour smell wafts out, mingling with the ever-present stench of the ship. You peer inside. The barrel is filled with a dark, syrupy brine, and floating in it are grayish, discolored chunks of what you assume is meat. This is salt beef or salt pork, the other pillar of the seaman's diet. To preserve it for long voyages, the meat was hacked into pieces and cured in an enormous amount of salt and saltpeter. The process drew out all the moisture, making it hostile to bacteria and allowing it to be stored for months, or even years. The man with the ladle, the same one who served you the hardtack, fishes out a piece and slaps it onto your tin plate. It doesn't look like any meat you've ever seen. It's a strange, mottled gray-green color, and the texture is an wingworm firm, almost woody. It's coated in a slimy layer of brine from the barrel. The smell is sharp and unappetizing. You watch as the ship's cook, a man named Jeb, who lost an eye in a bar fight and now claims it gives him a better perspective on simmering pots, takes the chunks of meat and tosses them into a large cauldron of seawater to boil. This is to desalinate it, to draw out some of the massive quantity of salt used in the curing process. After an hour of boiling, the meat is served. It's still incredibly tough and stringy. You saw it with your knife, a difficult task, and put a piece in your mouth. The saltiness is overwhelming. It's like chewing on a mouthful of seawater. It burns your tongue and the roof of your mouth, and beneath the salt, there is another flavor, a faint, but unmistakable, taste of decay, a subtle bitterness that hints the meat wasn't entirely fresh when it was first packed into the barrel months ago. This was the gamble with preserved foods. Sometimes, the salting process wasn't perfect. If the meat was old, or the salt concentration wasn't quite right, the decay would not be stopped, only slowed. The crew would refer to particularly bad barrels of meat as salt horse. So tough and unappetizing, they joked, it must have been carved from an old equine. One of the more disgusting, yet fascinating, tidbits of nautical life was the slush fund. The slush was the greasy, fatty scum that was boiled off the top of the salt meat. This foul-smelling grease was collected by the ship's cook. It was a valuable commodity. It could be used to grease ropes and masts, or, more commonly, it was sold ashore to tallow makers, who would use it to make cheap candles or soap. The money the cook made from selling this byproduct was known as his slush fund, a term we still use today for unofficial money used for bribes or illicit purposes. It's a direct linguistic link to the semi-rotten fat skimmed from a pirate's dinner. The quality of this meat is a subject of some historical contention. Official naval records, like those of the British Admiralty, specified high standards for the meat they procured. However, the reality was often very different. Corrupt victualling contractors would supply naval and merchant ships with the oldest, poorest quality meat they could get away with, often sorts from animals that had died of disease. Pirates, who mostly stole their provisions, had even less control. They took what they could get. Sometimes they might capture a ship carrying livestock, leading to a few days of feasting on fresh meat. But most of the time, they were stuck with barrels of salt horse, with no idea how old it was or where it came from. Some historians argue that the pirate diet was, on average, even worse than on naval sailors, as their supply chain was entirely dependent on random luck. You chew and chew, your jaw aching from the effort. You force yourself to swallow the salty, stringy fibers. You look around at the other men, who are eating with a grim sort of relish. This isn't a feast. It's just fuel. They're happy simply because it's not hardtack. You realize that your standards for what constitutes food are being rapidly, brutally recalibrated. You are learning to be grateful for things that, just a few weeks ago, you would have considered garbage. This, you think, as you try to wash the taste of rot from your mouth with a sip of rum-laced water, is the taste of your new life, precious and utterly spoiled. The salt beef has left you with a raging, unquenchable thirst. It's a cruel irony of life that sees surrounded by an infinite amount of water, yet constantly on the verge of dying from lack of it. Fresh water is the ship's most critical and fragile resource, more precious than any gold or silver. The ship's water supply is stored in a series of large wooden casks, or barrels, kept deep in the hold, away from the sun. The responsibility for managing this supply falls to the quartermaster. He is the guardian of the water, and he dispenses it with the miserly precision of a banker counting coins. Each man is entitled to a daily ration, typically about half a gallon. This has to suffice for both drinking and for diluting their daily rum ration into grog. There is none to spare for washing or cleaning. At the designated time, you line up with your tin cup. The quartermaster stands guard over the scuttlebutt, a cask of water brought up on deck for the day's use. He uses a dipper to measure out your share. You look into the barrel. The water isn't clear. It's a murky, brownish green, with a slick, slimy film floating on the surface. When the dipper stirs the water, you can see little white things wriggling in it. You take your cup and retreat to a quiet corner. You hold it up to the light. The water is full of suspended particles and, yes, tiny swimming larvae. It smells stale and swampy, like a pond that hasn't seen fresh rain in a year. This is what happens to water stored for long periods in wooden barrels. The wood itself leaches tannins, discoloring the water. Algae begins to grow, creating the green slime. And insects, like mosquitoes, find the stagnant water a perfect breeding ground, laying eggs that hatch into larvae. You have no choice. You close your eyes, pinch your nose, and take a long drink. It's warm and has a distinct off taste, earthy and unpleasant. You can feel the grittins of the suspended particles in your mouth, but it's wet, and it soothes the burning thirst in your throat. You learn to drink it quickly, to not think about what you're swallowing. This state of the water was so common that sailors had a whole vocabulary for it. They'd call it tangy or gummy. A popular method to make it more palatable was to mix it with alcohol. This is one of the primary origins of grog. The British Navy, in 1740, formalized the practice of mixing the daily rum ration with water, in part to control drunkenness, but also because the strong taste of the rum helped mask the foul taste of the water. Pirates, who had no such formal regulations but plenty of captured rum, did the same. A bit of rum could make even the funkiest water go down a little easier. A strange and little-known trick sailors used to try and purify their water was to add small amounts of vinegar or citrus juice if they had any. They didn't know why it worked, but they observed that it seemed to slow the spoilage and improve the taste. Another, more desperate method was to drop a piece of hot iron nor a heated cannonball into the cask. They believed the searing heat would somehow burn off the impurities. In reality, it probably just killed some of the surface-level algae and larvae, while adding a faint metallic taste to the brew. The scientific understanding of why water went bad was, of course, non-existent. The debate among ship's officers and doctors of the time was not about microbes, but about the container. For a long time, there was a fierce argument over whether water stored in iron-bound casks spoiled faster than water in wood-bound casks. Some captains swore by one, others by the other. The idea that the spoilage came from microscopic life within the water itself was completely alien. They saw the regular essence slime as a consequence of the water going bad, not the cause of it. Running low on water was a constant terror. A long period without rain or a failure to find a fresh water source on an island could spell doom for a crew. You hear stories from the older pirates about ships found adrift, the entire crew dead from dehydration. Their lips cracked and their bodies withered. It's a slow, agonizing way to go. This fear dictates the ship's movements. Every decision the captain makes which route to take, which islands to approach is weighed against the water level in the casks. Plundering a ship that had a full stock of fresh water was often considered a better prize than a chest of silver. You finish your ration, but the thirst lingers. Your body craves more, but you know you won't get it until tomorrow. You are learning a new kind of discipline, the discipline of thirst. You look out at the vast, blue, understandable sea and understand a fundamental truth of this life: freedom means nothing when you're dying for a cup of clean water. You lie awake on the hard deck, listening to the familiar symphony of the ship at night, the groan of the timbers, the rhythmic wash of the waves, the soft snores and murmurs of the men sleeping around you. You've become accustomed to these sounds. They are the lullaby of your new life. But tonight, You hear a new instrument in the orchestra. It's a faint, dry, scratching sound, a skittering. It seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. You shift your position, trying to ignore it, telling yourself it's just the ropes or the wood settling. But the sound is too deliberate, too alive. You prop yourself up on one elbow and let your eyes adjust to the deep, moon-drenched shadows of the deck. And then you see it, a sleek, dark shape, darting from behind a coil of rope towards a discarded piece of hardtack. It's a rat, but it's bigger than any city rat you've ever seen. It's fat and bold, its movements confident, almost arrogant. As you watch, another one joins it, and then another. They move like landlords, utterly unafraid, as if the ship belongs to them and you are merely a temporary guest. You quickly learn that the ship is teeming with them. They are the vessel's true natives, a thriving, parallel society living in the walls, the bilge, and the hold. They are a constant, gnawing menace. It was estimated that on any long sea voyage, rats could consume or spoil up to 10% of the ship's food stores. They gnaw through sacks of grain, defile barrels of flour with their droppings, and can even chew through the wood of a water cask, draining the precious contents into the bilge. They are not just a nuisance, they are a direct threat to your survival. The crew wages a constant, low-grade war against them. Some ships had a ship's cat, a prized hunter, but a single cat is hopelessly outmatched against a population of hundreds, if not thousands, of rats. So, the men take matters into their own hands. You see them setting crew traps or simply trying to corner them with a belaying pin. This leads to a rather grim and unique maritime economy. On some ships, a bounty was offered for every rat tail a sailor could produce. The quartermaster would pay a small sum from the ship's general fund for each kill, encouraging the men to actively hunt the pests. In times of extreme desperation, when rations ran dangerously low, the rats themselves would cease to be pests and would become the hunted for a different reason food. The idea is repulsive, but for a starving man, a roasted rat is a source of protein. It's a stomach-turning thought, but one that highlights the brutal pragmatism that governed this world. But the rats are not your only unwelcome companions. As you lie there, you feel a faint tickle on your arm. You brush it away, thinking nothing of it. Then you feel it again, on your neck. You sit up fully now, a sense of dread crawling up your spine. In the faint moonlight, you see them, cockroaches, dozens of them, scuttling away from the warmth of your blanket. They are everywhere in the cracks of the deck, in the folds of the sails. And you realize with a jolt of horror, in your clothes and your bedding, they are drawn to the filth and the food scraps. And at night, they emerge to feast. You will feel them crawling over you as you try to sleep. A light, disgusting touch in the darkness that will make your skin crawl. Historians are still in some disagreement about the vermin situation on pirate ships versus, say, naval or merchant vessels. Were pirate ships filthier by nature? One argument is that yes, they were. Pirates often used captured ships that were already old or in poor repair. They didn't have the resources or the discipline of a navy for regular cleaning and maintenance. Another school of thought argues that after a few months at sea, virtually all wooden ships of that era, regardless of their crew, would become similarly infested. The combination of wooden construction, stored food, and lack of sanitation made it an unavoidable outcome. The pirate's life wasn't necessarily dirtier, just longer and with fewer opportunities to resupply and clean ship in a safe, official port. So you are trapped in a three-front war. By day, you are plagued by the constant, maddening itch of the lice in your clothes. By night, you share your meager sleeping space with brazen rats and a tide of silent, crawling cockroaches. You can never be truly clean, and you can never be truly alone. These creatures are a constant, physical reminder of the squalor you inhabit. They are in your food, on your skin, in your bed. The ship is not an inanimate object. It is a living, breathing, crawling ecosystem, and you are just one small part of its food chain. One afternoon, a commotion on deck draws your attention. Two men are shouting at each other, their faces red with anger. One accuses the other of stealing his share of the rum ration. It's a petty squabble, the kind that could easily erupt into a knife fight on the docks of a port town. Here, however, things are handled differently. The quartermaster steps in, his presence immediately calming the situation. He doesn't take sides or issue a summary judgment. Instead, he declares that the matter will be settled by the articles. He calls for a meeting of the entire crew on the main deck. You gather with the others, forming a rough circle. This, you are about to witness, is pirate democracy in action. Before you set sail on this voyage, and before you were even allowed to be considered a full member of the crew, you had to take part in a solemn ceremony. The captain, or more often the quartermaster, would produce a document. This was the ship's articles, or the pirate code. It wasn't a standardized, universal document. Each crew drafted their own, tailored to their specific needs and the captain's personality. The articles were read aloud, and every man, from the captain down to the newest cabin boy, had to swear an oath to uphold them, often placing a hand on a Bible, a hatchet, or a pair of crossed pistols. Those who were illiterate would make their mark and X next to their name. This act transformed you. You were no longer just a sailor, you were a signatory to a social contract, a citizen of this floating rogue republic. Now, you see that contract put to the test. The quartermaster unrolls the ship's articles. It's a piece of parchment, worn and stained, covered in cramped handwriting and a series of crude marks. He reads the relevant clause aloud. Any man found to be stealing from another crewmate shall receive the punishment of Moses' law. Moses' law. It sounds biblical and severe. It meant 39 lashes with a cat o' nine tails. A brutal punishment, but one that was written down and agreed upon by all. The accuser presents his case. The accused is given a chance to defend himself. There are no lawyers, just shouting and pointing. But then, other crew members are allowed to speak, acting as witnesses. It's a messy, chaotic trial, but it is a trial. After hearing all the testimony, the crew as a whole votes on the man's guilt or innocence. In this case, the evidence against the thief is overwhelming. The vote is nearly unanimous. Guilty. This system of self-governance is one of the most fascinating aspects of the Golden Age of Piracy. On a naval or merchant ship, the captain's word was law. He held the power of life and death over his crew, and his authority was absolute. Pirate crews, made up of men who were fleeing exactly that kind of tyranny, deliberately created a system with a dramatic separation of powers. The captain was elected. He could also be deposed by a majority vote if the crew felt he was incompetent, cowardly, or hoarding plunder. He had absolute authority only during a battle or when chasing a prize. At all other times, his power was checked by the quartermaster, who was also elected and acted as a sort of tribal chieftain or ombudsman, ensuring fair treatment and the equitable distribution of food, water, and plunder. All major decisions where to sail, whether to attack a ship, what punishments to mete out were put to a vote. It was a radical form of democracy, born of necessity in a lawless world. Of course, there was a hidden, more sinister side to this democracy. The articles often included clauses that were anything but enlightened. A strange but common rule was no boys or women allowed. This was partly to prevent fights and jealousy over romantic entanglements. The punishment for bringing a woman on board in disguise was often death. Another article usually dictated a set compensation for injuries sustained in battle, a certain amount for the loss of a right arm, a lesser amount for a left arm, a set price for an eye or a leg. This was a very early, very crude form of workman's compensation, a system far ahead of its time. Historians continue to debate how democratic these codes truly were. Were they a genuine expression of revolutionary, egalitarian ideals, a precursor to the democratic revolutions that would sweep America and France decades later, or were they simply a pragmatic tool for managing a crew of volatile, violent criminals? The truth is likely a bit of both. The pirates weren't political theorists. They were practical men. They needed a system to prevent their floating society from tearing itself apart with infighting, and this blend of democratic voting and brutal, pre-agreed upon punishments was the solution they devised. As the guilty man is tied to the mast to await his flogging, you look at the articles in the quartermaster's hand. It is not the declaration of lofty ideals. It is a survival manual. It outlines a harsh, unforgiving world that won with rules. It's a brutal form of justice, but it's justice you had a vote in. For the first time, you feel a flicker of something other than fear or disgust. It's a sense of belonging. You are not just a prisoner on this ship. You are a citizen, and you have a voice. Even if that voice is just one among 100, deciding on the fate of a petty thief. The sun beats down on the deck, making the tar in the seams of the planks soft and sticky. The air is still and heavy. The entire crew gathers again. But this time the mood is not one of democratic deliberation. It's somber and tense. The man found guilty of theft is brought forward. His shirt is ripped from his back, and his hands are tied to the mainmast. His arms stretched high above his head, exposing the pale, taut skin of his back. The quartermaster steps forward. In his hand is the instrument of punishment, the Cato 9 tails. It's not a simple whip. It's a handle, usually made of wood or bound rope, from which 9 knotted cords of cotton or hemp, each about 2-3 feet long, are attached. It's a vicious tool, designed not just to inflict pain, but to shred flesh. On some naval vessels, the ends of the cords were dipped with small lead weights or sharpened bits of wire to make it even more brutal, though this was less common on pirate ships. The quartermaster doesn't swing the whip himself. That duty falls to the boatswain or another strong member of the crew. It's a grim task, and the man chosen sets his jaw and takes his position. A bucket of salt water stands ready nearby. You were told the sentence was law, which meant 39 lashes. This number has a specific origin. Jewish law set a limit of 40 lashes for a punishment, and to avoid accidentally breaking this law, the practice became to administer only 39. The number was adopted by many European powers and became a standard for severe floggings. The quartermaster gives a nod. The first lash cuts through the air with a sharp whistle and lands across the man's back. The sound is a sickening. With that, 9 parallel lines instantly appear on his skin, bright red against the pale white. The man groans, his body tensing against the ropes. A moment of silence, and then the second lash falls, cutting across the first set of lines. By the third lash, the skin has broken. Tiny beads of blood well up along the stripes. The flogging continues with a grim, steady rhythm. The boatswain puts his whole body into each swing, ensuring the punishment is delivered with full force. The man's back is quickly transformed into a bloody, mangled mess. The initial reed lines disappear, replaced by a raw, pulpy landscape of torn skin and muscle. With each strike, a fine spray of blood mists the air. The man's groans have turned into ragged screams, then into a low, desperate moaning. This is the primary method of maintaining discipline. It was quick, visceral, and served as a powerful warning to everyone watching. You stand there, unable to look away, a knot of ice in your stomach. This is the reality behind the articles you all agreed to. This is the price of breaking the rules. Between lashes, another man steps forward with a cloth dipped in a bucket of salt water and dabs it onto the prisoner's shredded back. You might think this is an act of cruelty, of literally rubbing salt in his wounds, and it is agonizingly painful. However, in the medical understanding of the time, this was considered a crude form of antiseptic. The salt was believed to clean the wounds and prevent them from festering or mortifying. It was a brutal kind of battlefield medicine. inflicting short-term agony in the hopes of preventing a long-term, fatal infection. There's a strange, almost theatrical element to these punishments that historians point out. The entire crew was required to witness it, a practice called punishment in front of the fleet in the Navy. It wasn't just about punishing the offender, it was about reinforcing the social order for everyone else. Yet, there's a debate about how crews, particularly pirate crews, truly felt about it. Did they watch with grim satisfaction, seeing justice done, or was there a silent, resentful empathy for the man being flogged? A feeling of that could be me next. The pirate ethos was built on a rejection of the brutal discipline of the Navy. Yet here they were, employing the very same tools of terror. It's a paradox at the heart of the pirate world. The 39th lash finally falls. The man is barely conscious, slumping against his bonds. He is cut down and half carried, half dragged below to the ship's surgeon or whoever passes for one to have his wounds properly dressed with tar or bandages. He will be unable to work for weeks, and his back will be a permanent tapestry of thick, ropey scars. He will be forever marked as a man who broke the code. You stand there, the coppery smell of blood in the air. The democracy of the pirate ship feels very different now. It's not just about voting and having your say. It's about consenting to a system of justice that is swift, brutal, and utterly unforgiving. The freedom of the pirate life is not an absence of rules. It is a strict adherence to a different, more savage set of laws, where the consequences of failure are written on your own back for everyone to see. The flogging left a dark cloud over the crew for days, a constant, unspoken reminder of the brutality that underpinned their society. You start to hear the older sailors talking in hushed tones about punishments far worse than the cat-o'-nine tails, reserved for crimes considered more heinous than simple theft. Crimes like cowardice in battle, or mutiny. One phrase is whispered with a particular sense of dread a walk beneath the hull. They are talking about keel hauling. It is a punishment so uniquely cruel and terrifying that its very name conjures images of unspeakable suffering. You ask an old, one-eyed pirate named Silas to explain it to you. He looks out at the sea, his face grim, and begins to describe the process. First, the condemned man would be brought to the mainyard arm, the large spar that extends horizontally from the mainmast. A rope would be tied to him, but this rope wasn't just tied around his waist. It was rigged in a specific, horrific way. It ran from one side of the ship, down underneath the hull, and up the other side. The man was essentially tied into a loop that encompassed the entire width of the ship, from port to starboard, beneath the waterline. The entire crew would be on deck to watch. On the quartermaster's signal, the man would be hoisted up and then dropped into the sea on one side of the ship. A team of men on the opposite side would then begin to pull on their end of the rope, dragging him down into the cold, dark water. The journey beneath the ship was a gauntlet of horrors. The hull of a ship is not a smooth surface. It's covered in a thick layer of sharp, jagged barnacles, splinters, and marine growth that would act like a giant cheese grater. As the man was dragged along the length of the keel, this rough surface would rip and tear at his clothes, his skin, and his flesh. He would be scraped raw from head to toe, his body shredded by 1,000 tiny cuts, and he would be drowning. The transit could take 30 seconds or more, a lifetime when your lungs are screaming for air. He would be struggling, inhaling salt water, disoriented in the dark, suffocating chaos beneath the vessel. If he was lucky, he would be dragged quickly. The faster the pull, the less time for the barnacles to do their work. But sometimes, as an added measure of cruelty, the crew would pull him slowly. If the ship was large, a single pass might be considered enough. On smaller vessels, they might drag him back and forth multiple times. If the man survived the dragging and the drowning, he would emerge on the other side of the ship, a barely recognizable, bleeding wreck. He would be hauled back on deck, choking and gasping, his body a single, massive wound. Often, the shock and the blood loss would kill him shortly after, even if he survived the initial ordeal. If he didn't die from the trauma or the drowning, a fatal infection in his mangled flesh was almost a certainty. There is a fascinating and gruesome debate among maritime historians about the true prevalence and nature of keel hauling. While it is famously associated with pirates, the practice was actually formalized and used most notably by the Dutch Navy. The English Navy, by contrast, considered it barbaric and officially preferred flogging or hanging. Did pirates actually perform it often? The historical record is surprisingly thin. While it's mentioned in many popular accounts in pirate folklore, documented, first-hand accounts of pirate skill hauling a man are extremely rare. Some historians argue it was more of a threat than a reality, a terrifying story told to keep men in line, the pirate equivalent of a bogeyman. Others maintain that, given the pirate's propensity for creative cruelty, it surely must have happened, even if it wasn't recorded. It remains one of those dark corners of history where folklore and fact are difficult to untangle. A particularly grim variation of the punishment, sometimes confused with keel hauling, was ding or warning. In this version, a man would be tied to a line at the bow end, repeatedly dunked under the water as the ship sailed, a process of near drowning used to extract a confession or as a lesser punishment. It was less likely to be fatal than a full keel hauling, but no less terrifying. Silas finishes his story, his one good eye staring into the distance. "Seen it done once," he says, his voice barely a whisper. "The man who came out of the water, he wasn't a man anymore. Just meat. You look at the hull of your ship, the part of it that sits below the waves. You'd never given it much thought before. Now, you can't help but picture it, encrusted with sharp shells, a rasp waiting in the dark. The flogging was an act of brutal, that straightforward pain. This is something else entirely. It's a punishment designed by minds that understood the deepest fears of a sailor drowning, the unknown darkness beneath the waves, and being torn apart by the very vessel that is supposed to be your home. It's a reminder that on the ship, there are fates far worse than a quick death in battle. Weeks turn into a monotonous blur of hard work, bad food, and cramped, restless nights. The initial thrill of your escape has long since faded, replaced by a dull, grinding routine. The vastness of the ocean, which once seemed to promise boundless freedom, now feels like an endless, empty prison. Tensions on the ship are running high. The rum rations are getting smaller. The meat barrel is almost empty, and you haven't seen another sail for over a month. Fights are breaking out over the smallest slights. The pirate democracy is starting to feel like a cage full of starving, irritable wolves. One morning, you are involved in one such fight. It's a stupid argument over a game of cards, fueled by cheap rum and frayed nerves. It escalates quickly from shouting to shoving. Before you know it, knives are drawn. The quartermaster and other crew members break it up before any real blood is shed. But a line has been crossed. Drawing a blade on a fellow crew mate over a game is a serious breach of the articles. The crew is assembled. A vote is taken. You and the other man are found equally at fault. The captain, a notoriously stern man named Calico Jack Raccoon, so named for his preference for bright, calico clothing, stands to deliver the verdict. You expect a flogging, a punishment you now view with a grim, resigned acceptance. But Rackham has other ideas. The ship is low on provisions, and morale is at rock bottom. He decides a more permanent example needs to be made. The sentence is marooning. The word hangs in the air, colder and more final than any sentence of lashing. Marooning was the ultimate punishment for a pirate. Short of outright execution, it was a slow, drawn-out death sentence. The passive form of murder that allowed the crew to feel slightly less like cold-blooded killers. The next day, land is sighted. It's not a bustling port or a friendly settlement. It's a tiny, desolate spit of sand and rock, barely a few hundred yards across, with a handful of scraggly palm trees and no visible source of fresh water. This is your new home. You and the other man are rowed ashore in a small dinghy. Your worldly possessions are given to you, the clothes on your back, a single pistol, a small pouch of gunpowder with one lead ball, and a flask of water. The pistol is not for hunting. There is nothing to hunt on this barren rock. It is a final, grim courtesy. It is for you, when the loneliness and the hunger become too much to bear. It's the tool for your own suicide. As the dinghy rolls back to the ship, you watch your former home, your entire world for the past few months, shrink into the distance. The figures of your crewmates become indistinguishable specks. Then the ship turns, catches the wind in its sails, and disappears over the horizon. The silence that descends is absolute, broken only by the gentle lapping of the waves on the shore and the cry of a lone seabird. You are utterly, terrifyingly alone. The practice of marooning gets its name from the Spanish word cimarron, meaning wild or untamed, which was originally used to describe runaway slaves who formed their own communities in the mountains. For pirates, it became the term for abandoning a man on a desolate shore. A fascinating, if grim, point of debate for historians is the psychology of the single pistol. Why provide the means for a quick end? Was it a flicker of mercy, or was it something more practical? Some scholars argue that it was a way for the crew to maintain a shred of their own humanity. By giving the man a choice, they could absolve themselves of direct responsibility for his death. He wasn't murdered, he simply chose not to survive. It's a subtle but important distinction in the moral calculus of a pirate. Did the maroon man see it as a kindness or as the ultimate psychological torture, a constant temptation to give up hope? You spend the first day frantically searching your island prison. Your hopes are quickly crushed. There are no streams, no springs. The only edible things are a few coconuts high in the palm trees, which are difficult and dangerous to climb. The sea offers fish, but you have no line, no hook, no net. Your existence has been reduced to its most basic elements: thirst, hunger, and a profound, crushing solitude. The days blend into one another, marked only by the rising and setting of the sun. You drink your water ration with agonizing slowness, each sip a postponement of the inevitable. The heat is relentless. The nights are cold. You talk to yourself, just to hear the sound of a human voice. You scream at the empty ocean until your throat is raw. The other man, your partner in this exile, has retreated into a grim silence on the other side of the island. You are companions in misery, but not in spirit. This was the fate of Alexander Selkirk, the Scottish sailor whose real-life story of being marooned for over 4 years on an island in the Pacific inspired the novel Robinson Crusoe. But Selkirk was lucky. His island was lush and full of resources. Your rock is a sterile wasteland. You sit on the beach, the useless pistol heavy in your lap. You look at the single lead ball. It represents a choice: a slow, agonizing death from starvation and exposure, or a quick, violent end. This is the ultimate expression of pirate justice. It isn't a quick slash of a sword or the brutal efficiency of the cat. It's the quiet, patient cruelty of isolation and despair. It's a punishment that attacks not just the body, but the mind itself, leaving you to be your own executioner. Let's rewind, for the sake of our story. Let's say you are marooned. Let's say you won that card game. Your luck turns. A few days later, the lookout screams, "Sail ho!" A fat, slow-moving Spanish galleon, heavy in the water, is spotted on the horizon. The mood on the ship transforms instantly from sullen despair to electric anticipation. This is it, the prize, the reason you all endure the filth, the hunger, and the brutality. The hunt is on. After a long chase and a short, vicious battle, which we will get to later, the galleon is yours. The plunder is more than you could have dreamed. Not just chests of silver coins, but silks, spices, and, most importantly, barrels of wine and fresh provisions. The crew is ecstatic. For the first time in months, there is a sense of victory and abundance. Now comes the most important ritual in a pirate's life: dividing the spoils. There is no chaos here, no frantic grabbing. This process is governed by the ship's articles with an almost religious solemnity. The entire crew gathers on the deck. The plunder is brought out and laid for all to see. The quartermaster, the crew's representative, stands over it, a ledger in his hand. The system is remarkably fair, at least on the surface. It's based on a share system. According to the articles you all signed, a regular sailor like you is entitled to 1 full share. The skilled specialists, the ship's surgeon if you have one, the master gunner, the carpenter might get a share in the quarter, or a share in the half. The quartermaster typically receives 1.5 or sometimes 2 shares, and the captain, he usually only gets 2 or 2.5 shares. This is a radical departure from the practice on privating or naval vessels, where the owners and officers would take the vast majority of the prize money, leaving a tiny fraction to be divided among the hundreds of common sailors. On a pirate ship, the captain might get only twice what you get, not 50 or 100 times more. This egalitarian distribution was one of the biggest draws of the pirate life. It was a promise of real, tangible reward for your risk before the general division. However, compensation is paid out for injuries sustained in the battle, as laid out in the articles. One man who lost 2 fingers gets his allotted payment. Another, who took a musket ball to the shoulder, receives his due. This money is taken from the top, before anyone else gets their share. It is the pirate insurance policy paying out. Finally, the quartermaster begins the count. He divides the total value of the plunder by the number of shares. Your name is called. You step forward, and a small, heavy cloth bag is dropped into your hands. You open it. It's filled with silver pieces of 8. You've never held this much money in your entire life. It feels impossibly heavy, the physical weight of your newfound wealth. You are, for the first time, rich. So what do you do with it? You can't exactly open a savings account. You are a wanted man. The only places you can spend this money are the pirate havens, lawless port towns like Port Royal in Jamaica before the earthquake of 1692, or later, Nassau on the island of New Providence in the Bahamas. These places were the pirate equivalent of a strip mall and a bank, catering specifically to crews flush with stolen cash. When the ship finally makes port in Nassau, the transformation is immediate. The grim, disciplined vessel you've lived on devolves into a floating party. The money you just received vanishes as quickly as you got it. There's a famous description of pirate spending habits from the era, written by a man named Charles Johnson, who may or may not have been a pseudonym for Daniel Defoe. He wrote that pirates would spend their money in a frenzy of debauchery and extravagance, on drink, gambling, and brothels, until their pockets were empty. It was not uncommon for a pirate to burn through a fortune that could have set him up for life in a matter of a week or 2. You join in the revelry. You drink fine wine instead of grog. You eat fresh fruit and roasted pig. You gamble away piles of silver on dice and card games. You live like a king for a few glorious, hedonistic days. But then, the money is gone. Your pockets are empty, and you find yourself standing on a dock with a pounding headache, broke, signing back onto the very same ship, under the very same articles, to do it all over again. Historians have long debated this seemingly self-destructive cycle. Was it just a reflection of the reckless, live-for-the-moment character of these men, or was it a rational response to their circumstances? Some argue that saving money was pointless for a pirate. Your career was likely to be shortened end on a gallows or in a watery grave. There was no retirement plan. Hoarding wealth you might never get to use was illogical. It made more sense to enjoy it intensely and immediately. Furthermore, a pirate with a large sum of money was a target for theft or murder, even in a safe haven like Nassau. The quickest way to secure your wealth was to convert it into pleasure as fast as possible. So your first taste of true pirate wealth is a fleeting, intoxicating dream. It's not a path to a new life, but a brief, wild vacation from the miserable one you've chosen. The gold and silver are not a means of escape. They are the fuel for the engine, the bait in the trap that keeps you coming back for more, ensuring you remain a pirate until the day you die. The wild, brief period of excess in Nassau is over. You're back on the ship, your pockets empty, your head still aching from the cheap rum. The ship puts back out to sea, and the familiar, grim routine reasserts itself. The diet returns to hardtack and salty, questionable meat. The fresh fruits and vegetables you gored on in port are fading, distant to memory. Weeks go by. You start to notice a change in yourself. A deep, bone-wearying lethargy that no amount of sleep can cure. Your muscles ache with a strange, dull pain. You feel irritable and weak. You look at your crewmates and see the same exhaustion mirrored in their faces. But then, more specific symptoms begin to appear. It starts with your gums. They feel swollen and sore. When you chew your rock-hard biscuit, they bleed freely, staining the soggy bread a pale pink. You look at your mouth in a small, cracked piece of mirror. Your gums are a dark, purplish red, and they look puffy, almost like they're trying to grow over your teeth. Then, you notice the bruises. Small, dark spots are appearing on your legs and arms, even where you haven't bumped into anything. Old scars, ones that had faded years ago, begin to ache and darken, some even looking like they might be reopening. Your joints swell, making every movement a painful effort. You are suffering from scurvy. Today, we know scurvy is caused by a severe deficiency of vitamin C, a nutrient essential for the body to produce collagen. Collagen is the glue that holds your body together. It's a critical component of skin, blood vessels, cartilage, and bone. Without vitamin C, your body literally starts to fall apart. But, in your time, the cause is a complete mystery. The ship's surgeon, who is still just the carpenter with a saw and a grim disposition, has no idea what's causing it. It's considered a disease of the sea, a mysterious affliction that seems to strike on long voyages. Theories abound. Some think it's caused by the foul air from the bilge. Others believe it's from the dampness, or the result of laziness and low morale. No one connects it to the monotonous, lifeless diet. The disease progresses with horrifying speed. Your teeth, no longer held securely in their sockets by healthy gum tissue, begin to loosen. You can wiggle them with your tongue. Eventually, they fall out, one by one, painlessly dropping from your rotting gums. Eating becomes an agonizing ordeal. The smell from your mouth is foul, the scent of decay. The psychological effects are just as devastating. You are overcome by a profound depression and exhaustion. You have no energy to work, no will to even get up. You see men who were once strong and boisterous now lying listlessly on the deck, too weak to move, their skin sallow, their eyes sunken. A particularly cruel and bizarre symptom of advanced scurvy, documented in many historical accounts, was the reopening of old wounds. Bones that had been broken and healed years before would spontaneously break again in the same place. Scars from old sword cuts would split open and begin to bleed, as if the injury were fresh. It was as if the body was unhealing itself, its past traumas literally returning to the surface. It must have felt like a form of supernatural curse. The history of scurvy is a story of tragic, missed connections. For centuries, sailors suffered and died from this disease by the hundreds of thousands. It killed far more sailors than combat, storms, and all other diseases combined. Yet, hints at a cure were repeatedly discovered and then forgotten. As far back as the 16th century, explorers noted that citrus fruits could cure it. In 1747, a British naval surgeon named James Lind conducted what is often considered the first ever clinical trial. He took 12 score, but icy sailors and divided them into pairs, giving each pair a different supplement to their diet. The pair that received 2 oranges and a lemon a day made a miraculous recovery. But Lind's discovery was not immediately accepted. The naval bureaucracy was slow to change, and the idea that a simple fruit could cure such a devastating disease seemed too simple. The academic debate was fierce. Many prominent doctors rejected Lin's findings, clinging to their own pet theories. It would take another 50 years before the Royal Navy officially mandated a daily ration of lemon or lime juice for its sailors, effectively eradicating scurvy from its fleets and giving them the nickname Limias. That you are a pirate. Decades before this innovation, you have no access to naval supplies or cutting-edge medical science. Your fate is tied to the contents of your ship's hold. You lie on the deck, your body aching, your gums bleeding, feeling your own tissues dissolving from the inside out. You are not being ravaged by a terrifying plague or violent enemy. You are being slowly, methodically dismantled by the simple absence of a piece of fruit. The gold in the hold is worthless. The cannons are useless. You would trade every piece of 8 on board for a single, fresh orange. Your friend, a young Welshman named Rhys, takes a fall during a sudden squall. He lands hard, and you hear a sickening crack, followed by a scream of agony. His leg is clearly broken, the lower part is bent at an unnatural angle, and a shard of white bone has pierced the skin. Panic sets in. In the orderly world of the land, this would mean a doctor, a splint, then weeks of careful rest. Here, on this ship, it means a visit to the carpenter. The ship's carpenter, a burly, taciturn man named Finch, is your de facto surgeon. He is a master of wood, not of flesh. His knowledge of the human body is rudimentary at best, gleaned from watching other surgeons at work and from the practical experience of patching up men after battles. His medical chest is not filled with delicate instruments, it's his toolbox. His primary tools are his saw, his mallet, his chisels, and the hot pitch he uses to seal the deck planks. Rhys is carried down to a relatively clear space on the gun deck. There is no operating theater, no sterile environment. The surgery will take place right here, amidst the grime and the stench, with other crew members holding him down. There is no anesthetic, save for a large swig of raw, undiluted rum. They call it the bite of the black dog. Rhys downs it, his eyes wide with terror. It will do little to dull the pain, but it might render him unconscious, or, at the very least, too drunk to fight back effectively. Finch examines the leg. It's a compound fracture, one of the most dangerous injuries you can sustain. The risk of infection is enormous. Finch looks at the wound, then at his tools, then back at Rhys. He shakes his head. He can't set or break this bad. The bone is too shattered, and the risk of the wound mortifying becoming gangrenous is too high. There is only one course of action he knows: amputation. This was the grim reality of serious injury at sea. For complex fractures, deep wounds, or any injury that showed the first signs of gangrene, a dark discoloration of the skin and a foul-smell amputation was the only solution. It was a race against the infection, a desperate attempt to sacrifice the limb to save the life. Finch chooses his tool, a small, sharp-toothed saw he normally uses for fine woodworking. He also lays out a long, wicked-looking knife, several lengths of rope, and a brazier filled with glowing coals, in which the flat head of an iron bolt is heating up. The preparation is brutal and swift. Several strong men are called to hold Rhys down. One man is assigned to each limb, another to his head, to try and muffle his screams. A tourniquet, a simple loop of rope twisted tight with a stick, is applied high up on his thigh to try and stanch the bleeding. Finch takes the knife. First, he makes a deep, circular cut through the skin and muscle, a few inches above the break. Rhys convulses, a strangled, inhuman scream tearing from his throat despite the man covering his mouth. Then, Finch picks up the saw. He places the teeth against the exposed bone and begins to work. A quick, back and forth motion. The sound is unforgettable, a wet, grating, crunching noise that cuts through the air. It's the sound of a man being dismantled. This grim scene highlights a fascinating, if morbid, historical fact: the link between barbers and surgeons. For centuries, the two professions were intertwined. Barbers, who had sharp razors and a steady hand, were the ones called upon for bloodletting, tooth pulling, and minor surgery. The red and white striped barber's pole is a relic of this time. The red represents blood, and the white represents bandages, while by your time, surgery was beginning to emerge as a more distinct profession. The old ways died hard, especially at sea, where specialization was a luxury. A man who could work with a sharp tool, whether it was a carpenter's saw or a barber's razor, was the best you were going to get. The historical debate here often centers on the skill level of these impromptu surgeons. Were they all just clumsy butchers? As they're often portrayed, some historians argue that many ship's carpenters and cooks, through sheer repetition, became surprisingly adept at common procedures like amputation. They developed a crude but effective understanding of anatomy, where to cut, how to tie off major arteries, how to saw through bone cleanly. They weren't doctors, but they were seasoned trauma specialists. Others maintained that survival rates were abysmal and that any successful operation was more a matter of the patient's constitution and sheer luck than the surgeon's skill. Finch finishes his work. The severed lower leg is tossed into a bucket with a grim thud. But the ordeal isn't over. The final, most agonizing step is cauterization. The red-hot iron bolt is pulled from the brazier. Finch presses it against the raw, bleeding stump. The smell of burning flesh fills the air, and the sizzle is a sound that will haunt your nightmares. Reese, who had mercifully passed out, convulses back into consciousness with a final, piercing shriek. The cauterization seals the blood vessels, stopping the bleeding. It's the only method they have. Sutures and ligatures were known, but were considered more complex and less reliable in these unsanitary conditions. The stump is then coated in a layer of hot or the same tar used for the ship's rigging as a protective dressing, and then wrapped in dirty rags. Reese is given more rum and left to shiver in a feverish state. His surgery is over. Now begins the real battle, the fight against the infection that is almost certain to follow. You look at the carpenter, Finch, wiping his bloody saw on a piece of canvas, his face impassive. He is not a monster. He is a pragmatist. In this world, saving a life often means doing something horrific. Reese survives the night and the next, but he is not getting better. He lies in a haze of fever, his body racked with tremors. The stump of his leg, crudely wrapped in tar soaked rags, has begun to swell, and the skin around the bandages is an angry, inflamed red. The foul, sweetish odor starts to emanate from the wound, a smell that cuts through even the ship's usual stench. It's the smell of rotting flesh. The gangrene that Finch had tried to outrun with his saw has caught up. The infection is spreading up Reese's leg. There will be no second amputation. He is too weak to survive it. Everyone on board, including Reese himself in his moments of lucidity, knows that he is dying. There is nothing anyone can do but give him water and wait. This is the most common outcome of a major surgical procedure on a pirate ship. The initial trauma of the surgery was just the first hurdle. The second, and far more lethal, was the almost inevitable onset of infection. The concept of germs was more than a century away. The surgeon's hands were unwashed. His tools were, at best, wiped clean on a rag, but never sterilized. The bandages were old bits of canvas or clothing, teeming with bacteria. An open wound in this environment was essentially a death sentence. Use it with Reese, trying to offer what little comfort you can. He is delirious most of the time, muttering in Welsh, his eyes widened and focused. You watch the dark discoloration of the gangrene creep slowly up his thigh, a visible tide of death. The infection is now in his bloodstream. Sepsis. His breathing becomes shallow and dragged. A few days after the amputation, his suffering finally ends. He dies quietly in the suffocating heat below deck. His passing is marked with little ceremony. Under the pirate code, his share of the plunder and his meager personal belongings are passed to his designated mate, lot, or friend, in this case, another Welsh sailor. His body is sewn into his own hammock with a heavy cannonball at his feet to weigh it down. The crew gathers briefly on deck. The captain says a few short, functional words. Then, with a tilt of a wooden plank, Reese's body slides over the side and disappears into the waves with a muted splash. The ship sails on. Life, such as it is, continues. The sheer scale of death from disease and infection in this era is staggering. For every man killed in glorious combat, dozens more would succumb to the silent, invisible enemy's scurvy, dysentery, typhus, and post-injury infections like gangrene and tetanus. A ship was a perfect incubator for disease, and a pirate ship, with its overcrowded conditions and inconsistent access to supplies, was even more so. A curious and little-known medical practice of the time was the use of maggot therapy. It sounds horrific, but some surgeons observed that wounds that became infested with maggots seemed to heal better and were less likely to develop gangrene. They didn't understand why, but we know now that certain species of maggots consume only dead, necrotic tissue, effectively cleaning the wound and even secreting substances that have antimicrobial properties. While it wasn't a standardized treatment, a pragmatic ship's surgeon who noticed this might have deliberately allowed maggots to remain in a wound, a seemingly disgusting act that could have inadvertently saved a man's life. The historical debate around pirate mortality rates is a complex one. How long did the average pirate's career last? It's a difficult question to answer definitively. The Golden Age of Piracy was actually quite short, lasting roughly from the 1690 seconds to the late 1720 seconds. Many pirates' careers were brutally brief, lasting only a year or two before they were captured, killed, or died of disease. Some, like the infamous Bartholomew Black Bart Roberts, had spectacularly successful but short careers of just a few years. A few, like Henry Avery, managed to pull off one enormous heist and then disappear, presumably to live out their lives in quiet obscurity. But these were the exceptions. Most historians agree that the vast majority of men who turned to piracy did not die rich. They didn't die in a blaze of glory. They died like Reese. They died of a fever in a filthy hammock. They died of a slow, creeping rot that started in a minor wound. They died from a diet that systematically dismantled their bodies from the inside out. The romantic image of a pirate's death, a sword in hand, a defiant shout on his lips, is a comforting fiction. The reality was usually quiet, pathetic, and agonizingly slow. Watching Reese's body sink into the endless blue, you are struck by the cheapness of life on this ship. Men are a disposable commodity. When one breaks, he is thrown away and another is found to take his place. The camaraderie you thought you saw is a fragile thing, a bond of shared risk, not of genuine care. In the end, everyone dies alone, and the ocean swallows them without a trace. The death of Reese, and the ever-present shadow of scurvy and sickness, casts a pall of despair over the ship. The only escape, the only medicine for the soul available here, is rum. Every day, the crew gathers for the distribution of the daily ration. It's a ritual as ingrained as the raising of the sails. The quartermaster stands over a barrel of the potent, dark liquid, doling out each man's share. On a Royal Navy ship, the rum would be carefully diluted with water and lemon juice when available to create grog, a measure to control drunkenness. On your pirate ship, the rules are far more lax. You often get your rum straight, a fiery shot of liquid courage and oblivion. The rum isn't a refined, aged spirit you might find in a fancy tavern. It's a harsh, raw product of the Caribbean sugar plantations, a byproduct of the same brutal system of slavery that many pirates, ironically, claimed to be rebelling against. It's cheap, powerful, and plentiful. It's the lubricant that keeps the gears of the pirate ship turning. In the immediate sense, it feels like a godsend. A swig of rum warms you against the damp night chill. It dulls the constant, nagging ache in your muscles and joints. It provides a brief, blissful respite from the crushing boredom and anxiety of a long, fruitless voyage. It gives you a temporary surge of confidence, a liquid courage that might make the difference between freezing in fear and swarming over the rails of a merchant ship. For a few hours, you can forget the filth, the disease, and the constant dread of death. But alcohol is not a panacea. It's a treacherous ally. The temporary warmth it provides is an illusion. It actually lowers your core body temperature by dilating blood vessels, making you more susceptible to hypothermia in the long run. The courage it lends can quickly curdle into aggression and paranoia. You see it all around you. The rum fuels the petty squabbles that so often escalate into knife fights. Men, their judgment clouded by drink, make stupid mistakes while climbing the rigging or handling the sails, leading to falls and injuries. The brief euphoria gives way to a sullen, depressive hangover, making the grim reality of the next day even harder to face. And for some, the daily ration isn't enough. They dip into their own private stashes, but during the last port call, drinking themselves into a stupor. You see men lost to the bottle, their health deteriorating even faster than the rest of the crew. They become unreliable, a liability in a fight, and a drain on the ship's resources. Alcoholism, though it wouldn't be called that for another century, is rampant. A little-known fact about alcohol at sea is its use as a currency. In the intricate social economy of the lower deck, a man's rum ration could be used for trade. If you were skilled at carving scrimshaw or mending clothes, you might trade your services for another man's share of rum. If you were on good terms with the cook, you might slip him your ration in exchange for a slightly better piece of salted meat. It was a liquid asset, as valuable in its own way as a silver coin. The role of alcohol in pirate society is a subject of ongoing historical discussion. Was it the primary cause of the indiscipline and violence that characterized pirate life, or was it merely a symptom of it? A form of self-medication for men living in unimaginably harsh and traumatic conditions. The traditional view, often shaped by sensationalist accounts like Charles Johnson's A General History of the Pirates, paints pirates as constantly drunk and disciplined brutes. More recent historical analysis, however, suggests a more complex picture. Many successful pirate captains, like the famously abstemious Black Bart Roberts, imposed strict rules regarding alcohol. On his ships, lights were to be out by 8 p.m. And any drinking after that time had to be done on the open deck, not below. He understood that a drunk crew was an unreliable crew. This suggests that at least some pirate leaders recognized alcohol as a necessary evil that needed to be carefully managed, not a free-for-all. The idea of pirates being perpetually drunk is likely an exaggeration. No ship could function effectively under such conditions. You sit on the deck, your tin cup of rum in hand. You drink it down, feeling the familiar fire spread through your chest. It temporarily quiets the gnawing fear in your gut and eases the ache in your scurvy-ridden gums. But you also see the older pirates, men whose faces are a roadmap of broken veins, whose hands tremble with a constant tremor. You see the cost of this medicine. It's a deal with the devil, trading long-term health for short-term relief. It doesn't cure the disease of despair, it just keeps it at bay for one more night. The ship is not just a floating slum, it's a floating tavern with no closing time. And the bill always comes due in the morning. The weeks at sea stretch into months. The initial shock and the later excitement have both worn off, leaving behind a vast, empty expanse of time. The ship plods through an endless cycle of dawn, dusk, and the monotonous duties in between. Mending sails, coiling ropes, swabbing the filthy deck. The work is hard enough to tire your body, but not engaging enough to occupy your mind. And your mind begins to play tricks on you. You are trapped in a psychological cage, a prison made not of iron bars, but of wooden water and an unchanging horizon. You are in closer physical proximity to other people than you have ever been in your life, yet you feel a profound sense of isolation. The conversations are repetitive and shallow, revolving around the same three topics: past glories, future plunder, and base physical desires. There is no intellectual stimulation, no art, no beauty, save for the occasional spectacular sunset, which most of the crew is too jaded to even notice. This crushing boredom, or ennui, was a well-known affliction of long sea voyages. It was a mental corrosion that could be as dangerous as scurvy. Men become listless, apathetic, and prone to depression. The mind, starved of stimulus, turns inward and begins to feed on itself. You find yourself becoming paranoid. Did that man look at you the wrong way? Are they whispering about you over there? The close, first intimacy of the ship means there are no secrets, but it also means that every glance, every hushed conversation, is open to interpretation, and your mind, steeped in anxiety, almost always chooses the most negative one. You start to guard your meager possessions more jealously. You trust no one. Fear is your constant companion, not just the acute, heart-pounding fear of battle, but a low-grade, persistent anxiety, the fear of a sudden squall capsizing the ship in the middle of the night, the fear of a lookout spotting the sails of a Royal Navy man-o'-war, a vessel that could outgun and outrun you with ease, the fear of the diseases that creep silently through the crew, the fear of the slow, creeping madness that you feel taking root in your own head. You see it happening to others, too. Men who snap, flying into a rage over nothing. Men who retreat into a catatonic silence, staring at the waves for hours on end. Men who developed strange compulsions, unsuperstitions. Superstition was rife on all ships of this era, and pirate vessels were no exception. It was a way of trying to impose some sense of order and control on a chaotic and unpredictable world. Whistling on deck was said to summon a gale. Killing an albatross was a harbinger of terrible luck, as the birds were believed to carry the souls of dead sailors. Having a woman on board was, of course, considered disastrously unlucky, a belief that conveniently reinforced the all-male nature of the society. One particularly odd and little-known superstition was the belief in caul, the thin, membranous sac that sometimes covers a newborn's head at birth. A dried caul was considered a powerful amulet against drowning. Sailors would pay a high price for one, keeping it on their person at all times, a grim talisman in a world where drowning was a constant possibility. Historians and psychologists have long debated the precise nature of the mental toll on sailors in the age of sail. Was the high incidence of violence and erratic behavior simply a result of the type of men drawn to the life criminals, outcasts, and desperate individuals, or did the environment itself create the pathology? The modern understanding of psychology suggests the latter is a major factor. The combination of sleep deprivation, poor nutrition, which has a direct impact on mental health, constant stress, and sensory monotony is a perfect recipe for creating psychological distress, including anxiety, depression, and paranoia. It's a classic example of how environment can shape behavior. You try to find ways to fight it. You focus on your work with a fierce intensity, trying to lose yourself in the physical repetition of a task. You try to engage in games of cards or dice, but they too often end in acrimony. You try to recall stories and songs from your past life, humming them to yourself, a fragile link to a world that feels a million miles away. But the cage is strong. You are surrounded by 100 other men, yet you are locked in solitary confinement inside your own skull. The true horror of pirate life, you realize, is not the violence or the filth. It's the slow, inexorable grinding down of your own mind. It's the terrifying feeling of your own thoughts becoming as empty and as endless as the ocean around you. The cry from the masthead lookout shatters the monotony like a thunderclap sail ho, colors of Spain. Instantly, the ship explodes into a frenzy of purposeful activity. The lethargy and paranoia vanish, replaced by a surge of adrenaline. This is the moment everything has been building towards. The captain strides onto the quarterdeck, a spyglass to his eye. He barks orders. and the crew responds with a speed and efficiency you haven't seen in months. Sails are unfurled to catch every last breath of wind. The gun crews run to their stations. The ship, once a listless floating storm, transforms into a sleek, living predator. You are assigned to one of the gun crews on the main deck. Your station is a massive cannon, a 9-pounder, a hulking beast of cast iron. The gun captain, a grizzled veteran with gunpowder tattoos on his arms, screams orders over the growing noise. The process of loading and firing is a well-drilled, frantic ballet of violence. "Worm," he yells. A man shoves a long tool with a corkscrew and the worm down the cannon's barrel to pull out any smoldering debris from the previous shot that could cause a premature explosion. "Sponge." Another man rounds a wet sheepskin sponge down the barrel to extinguish any remaining embers and clean the bore. "Load." A cloth cartridge filled with black powder is shoved in, followed by a heavy 9-pound iron ball. Then a wad of rope fiber is rammed down to pack it all in tight. The enemy ship, a large merchantman, is now close enough to see the panic on its decks. Your captain orders a black flag raise the infamous Jolly Roger. The effect is immediate and chilling. It's an act of psychological warfare, a clear declaration of intent surrender or die. There will be no quarter for resistance. The Spanish ship, foolishly or bravely, chooses to fight. A puff of white smoke erupts from its side. Then a moment later, the air is split by the roar of its cannon. The ball screams over your head and smashes into the mainmast, sending a shower of giant, deadly splinters across the deck. This is one of the most terrifying and lethal aspects of naval combat. It wasn't always the cannonball itself that killed you. It was the shrapnel it created. An iron ball hitting a wooden ship would send thousands of jagged wooden splinters, some as large as daggers, flying in all directions. They could disembowel a man, take off a limb, or pierce an eye. You learn to duck not just from the ball, but from the ship itself exploding around you. "Run out," the gun captain screams. Your crew levers the massive cannon forward, its small iron wheels squealing as the muzzle pushes through the gun port. The captain aims, adjusting the elevation with a wooden wedge called a quine. He steps back, holding a long, slow-burning match. "Fire!" He touches the match to the touch hole. There's a fizz, a flash, and then a deafening, earth-shattering boom that feels like a physical blow to your chest. The cannon leaps backwards in a violent recoil, restrained by thick ropes. A cloud of thick, acrid, sulfurous smoke instantly fills the air, blinding you, choking you, burning your eyes and throat. The noise is a physical assault. It's not just one cannon, but 10, 20, all firing as fast as they can load. The continuous, rolling thunder is so loud it can cause permanent hearing loss, burst eardrums, and leave you disoriented and stunned. You can't hear the man next to you screaming. You operate on instinct and hand signals. There is a fascinating historical debate about pirate battle tactics. The Hollywood image is of two ships pulling up alongside each other for a prolonged cannon duel. In reality, pirates almost always sought to avoid this. They were usually outgunned by naval vessels and even some larger merchantmen. A long-range cannon fight was a losing game for them. Their primary strategy was speed and terror. They would use smaller, faster ships like sloops to quickly close the distance, weathering one or two broadsides from the enemy. Their goal was not to sink the ship with cannon fire that would send the plunder to the bottom of the sea. Their goal was to get close enough to board. Their cannon fire was aimed high, at the rigging and masts, to disable the ship and prevent it from escaping. They also used a special type of ammunition called chain shot, two smaller cannonballs linked by a chain or bar shot to halves of a bowl linked by a solid bar, which would spin through the air and were devastatingly effective at shredding sails and snapping ropes. The air is a chaotic hellscape of smoke, noise, and flying wood. You see a man a few feet away clutch his stomach, his eyes wide with shock, as a large splinter impales him. He collapses to the deck, There is no time to help him. You are already spawning and reloading your cannon, your movements frantic and automatic, your mind numb with the sheer sensory overload. This isn't a glorious battle. It's a dirty, deafening, industrial process of killing, and you are just a cog in the machine. The cannonade has done its job. The Spanish galleon is crippled, its mainmast cracked and its sails a tattered mess of shredded canvas. It lies wallowing in the waves, unable to flee. Now, the second phase of the battle begins. Your captain gives the order you've been waiting for borders away. Grappling hooks are thrown, their iron claws biting deep into the enemy's railings, pulling the two ships together with a groaning crunch of timber. The pirates, who had been huddled behind the bulwarks, rise as one with a terrifying scream. It's a raw, primal sound, designed to shatter the last vestiges of the defenders' morale. You are part of the first wave. You have a pistol tucked into your belt and a cutlass in your hand. The cutlass is the iconic pirate weapon for a reason. It's not a fencer's dueling sword. It's a short, broad, heavy blade, designed for close quarters butchery. It's more like a sharpened crowbar than a rapier, perfect for hacking through ropes, wood, or flesh in the cramped, chaotic confines of a ship's deck. You leap across the gap between the two ships, landing on the enemy deck amidst a tangle of fallen rigging and splintered wood. The scene is one of utter chaos. The air is still thick with smoke, and the deck is slick with blood and seawater. The remaining Spanish crew, a mix of sailors and a few soldiers, try to form a defensive line. The fight is not a series of elegant one-on-one duels. It's a brutal, swirling melee. It's a confusing crush of bodies, a cacophony of screams, grunts of effort, and the sickening thud of metal hitting bone. You swing your cutlass wildly, relying on brute force, not technique. You parry a clumsy thrust from a Spanish sailor and slam the hilt of your sword into his face. He stumbles back, and another pirate finishes him with an axe. You see your crewmates fighting with a savage ferocity. They are a terrifying sight. Many have stripped to the waist, their bodies lean and scarred. They wield a motley collection of weapons, axes, boarding pikes, and even crude, homemade grenades, hollow glass bottles filled with gunpowder and a short fuse, which they light and toss onto the deck to cause panic and confusion. The fighting is over in a matter of minutes. The Spanish resistance, already weakened and demoralized by the cannon fire, quickly collapses. Some sailors throw down their weapons and beg for mercy. The officers, who know they are likely to be singled out for harsh treatment, fight on desperately under cut down. The battle is won. The adrenaline begins to fade, and the aftermath comes into sharp focus. The deck of the galleon is a butcher's yard. Bodies lie everywhere, sprawled in pools of their own blood. The air is filled with the groans and cries of the wounded from both sides. This is the part of the battle that is never shown in the adventure stories. The ship's surgeon, your old friend Finch, the carpenter and his assistants come aboard. They are not here to save everyone. Their priority is the pirate crew. They move among the wounded pirates, making quick, brutal assessments. A man with a superficial cut gets a quick bandage. A man with a shattered limb or a gut wound is given a swig of rum, if he's lucky, carried back to the pirate ship for the grim surgery you've witnessed before. More often than not, a wound deemed mortal is simply left alone, the man left to die where he lies. A strange and often debated aspect of pirate combat is their treatment of prisoners. The pirate code was clear: no quarter. This meant that if a ship resisted, the pirates were under no obligation to take prisoners. In practice, however, their response varied wildly. Sometimes, in the heat of battle, enraged pirates would slaughter the entire crew of a ship that had put up a stiff fight. Other times, they would show a surprising degree of pragmatism. They might kill the officers, who were symbols of the authority they despised, but spare the common sailors, They would often torture the captain or ship's officers to force them to reveal the location of hidden valuables, but the common seamen were often seen as potential recruits. After all, this is how you yourself joined the crew. This selective brutality was a powerful tool. It sent a clear message to future victims: resistance is futile and will be met with death, while surrender may lead to survival, or even a new life. You stand there, your cutlass dripping, your knuckles white, your ears are ringing, and your body is trembling from the adrenaline crash. You look at the carnage around you. The lifeless eyes of a young Spanish soldier stare up at the sky. A wounded pirate, a man you shared a joke with just this morning, is screaming for his mother as Finch prepares his saw. The exultant shouts of victory from your crewmates, who are already breaking into the ship's hold in search of plunder, sound distant undalian. This is the price of your treasure. This is the bloody, agonizing reality of a pirate's payday. The victory cries of your crewmates echo around you, but the sound doesn't register as triumphant. It's just noise, a jarring counterpoint to the quiet groans of the dying. You look down at your hands. They are steady now, but they are covered in blood. Some of it yours from a shallow cut on your forearm. Most of it someone else's. The metallic smell is thick in your nostrils. You survived. This simple fact takes a moment to sink in. In the chaotic, terrifying blur of the last hour, you moved on pure instinct, a primal cocktail of fear and adrenaline. You didn't think about living or dying, you just fought. Now, in the relative quiet of the aftermath, the realization of your own survival washes over you. It's not a feeling of joy or relief. It's a hollow, empty sensation, like you've been scooped out inside. You step carefully over the bodies, making your way across the captured deck. You see men you know, men you've worked with, unshared drum with, lying still and silent. A man named Black Bill, who was a master at climbing the highest rigging, lies near the mast, his chest a bloody ruin. Another, a quiet boy from Cork, is slumped against the railing, his eyes open and vacant. They are no longer crewmates. They are just cargo that will soon be committed to the deep. You look at the survivors. They are a grim sight. Some are tending to their wounds, their faces pale with shock. Others are already drunk, having smashed open the first barrel of wine they could find, their wild laughter sounding mannequin strange amidst the carnage. The line between celebration and hysteria is razor thin. You survived, but at what cost? You are wounded, though not seriously. Your body aches from exertion you didn't know you were capable of. Then your mind is scarred in ways you can't yet comprehend. The images of the fight, the sounds, the smells, they are burned into your memory, ready to replay themselves in the quiet hours of the night. This is the psychological reality of combat that is so often overlooked. Survival is not an endpoint. It's the beginning of a different kind of struggle. In modern terms, you would be diagnosed with acute stress disorder or PTSD. In your time, there is no name for it. It's just called being haunted or battle-shocked. You are expected to shake it off, have a drink, and get back to work. A fascinating, though grim, detail from this era is the concept of the lucky charm. Many pirates, despite their rough and godless reputation, were deeply superstitious and would carry personal talismans into battle. These could be anything from a crooked coin to a rabbit's foot, or even a stolen religious medallion worn for protection rather than piety. Historians debate the function of these objects. Were they a genuine belief in supernatural protection, or were they a psychological tool? A focal point for hope that provided a small measure of comfort and courage in the face of overwhelming terror. The belief that you were lucky or protected could, in itself, be a powerful mental armor. The debate among historians about the pirate mindset is intense here. Were these men natural-born killers, psychopaths who thrived on violence, or were they ordinary men brutalized by their environment until violence became a necessary and reflexive part of their existence? The truth is, they were likely a mix of both. A pirate crew would attract men who were already inclined towards violence, but the life itself, the constant threat, the brutal discipline, the kill or be killed nature of combat would undoubtedly traumatize and harden even the most peaceable recruit. You didn't have to be a monster to become a pirate, but the life would do its best to turn you into one. You watch as the quartermaster directs the plunder, his face a mask of cold efficiency. He steps over a dead body as if it were a misplaced coil of rope. You see the surviving Spanish sailors, their faces a mixture of terror and resignation, being herded together. Some will be forced to join your crew, to fill the spots left by the dead. They will be given the same choice you were given. The cycle will continue. You look at your reflection in a shard of broken mirror on the deck. The face that stares back at you is a stranger. It's gaunter, harder. The eyes hold a new, cold light. You survived. But the person you were before the battle did not. He died somewhere in the smoke and the screaming. The man who is left is a survivor. Yes, but he is also, now and forever, a killer, and you are not sure if that is a form of luck at all. In the days following the battle, a strange mood settles over the ship. The hold is bursting with plunder, and the rum flows freely. There should be a sense of celebration, of shared victory. Instead, the atmosphere is thick with suspicion and simmering resentment. The brutal reality of combat has stripped away the veneer of unity, revealing the raw, self-serving core of the pirate compact. You see it in the arguments that break out over the division of the spoils. The quartermaster follows the articles to the letter, but men still grumble. One man, whose wound is slightly worse than another's, argues he deserves a larger share of the injury compensation. Two others nearly come to blows over a single, fine silk shirt taken from the Spanish captain's cabin. The egalitarian system you once admired now seems like a barely contained squabble among thieves. The so-called brotherhood of the coast feels like a lie. This was a term romanticized long after the fact. While pirates did have a shared identity and would sometimes cooperate, their world was not one of noble, loyal brothers. It was a loose, shifting alliance of convenience, governed by greed and self-preservation. You see this fragility in the treatment of the wounded. Once the immediate danger is past, the men who are seriously injured are no longer seen as heroes. They are a drain on resources. They can't perform their duties. They consume food and water without contributing. You see the able-bodied sailors growing impatient with them. Their expressions a mixture of pity and annoyance. A man's value on this ship is directly tied to his ability to fight and work. The moment that is gone, he becomes a liability. This cold pragmatism extended to their dealings with each other. A famous example is the story of Captain Howell Davis. He was a cunning and successful pirate captain, but he was ambushed and killed by the Portuguese governor of the island of Principe. Did his loyal crew fall apart in despair? No. They immediately held a vote, right there in the shadow of their captain's murder, and elected a new one, a man named Bartholomew Roberts. Black Bart would go on to become the most successful pirate of the Golden Age. The story perfectly illustrates the pirate mindset. The system was more important than the man. The brotherhood was a functional arrangement, not an emotional one. There is a fascinating, unmurky area of pirate history concerning what happened when a crew dissolved or a ship was wrecked. Did the brothers stick together? The historical record is mixed. In some cases, like the survivors of Sam Bellamy's wrecked ship, the Whydah, they did seem to stay together, perhaps for mutual protection as they tried to make their way to safety. In many other cases, however, the moment the voyage was over and the money was gone, the crew would scatter to the four winds. The bonds forged in battle were often not strong enough to survive the harsh realities of life back on land. Historians still debate whether pirate loyalty was a myth or a situational reality, strong in the heat of the moment but brittle over the long term. You experienced this breakdown of trust firsthand. You had formed a quiet friendship with another sailor, a man named Finn. You had watched each other's backs in the fight, but now You catch him looking at your small bag of coins with a glint in his eye you don't like. You start sleeping with your plunder literally tied to your body. A lumpy, uncomfortable shield against your own shipmates. The paranoia you felt during the long, boring weeks has returned, but now it's sharper, more focused. The enemy is no longer some distant Spanish galleon, it's the man sleeping 3 feet away from you. The crew is a collection of individuals bound by a simple contract to risk your life for a share of the profit. There is no deeper ideology, no loyalty beyond the articles. You are not a band of brothers fighting against tyranny. You are employees in the most dangerous company in the world. Your contract is with the plunder, not with each other. You realize that the greatest threat on this ship isn't a naval frigate or a store. It's the very nature of the men themselves. They are a crew of hungry ghosts, driven by a desire that can never be truly satisfied. The moment the prize is won, the unity evaporates because the common goal has been achieved. All that is left is a group of armed, greedy, and paranoid individuals, temporarily rich but spiritually bankrupt, trapped together on a small wooden island in the middle of a vast, indifferent sea. The Brotherhood is a ghost, a story they tell themselves to make the loneliness and the danger more bearable. You've been a pirate for over a year now. You have survived battles, storms, disease, and the constant, grinding misery of life at sea. You have, on 2 separate occasions, held a small fortune in your hands, and yet, here you are, back on the deck of the same ship, your pockets empty again after a brief, feverish spree in a lawless port. You are no richer, no freer, and no closer to a different life than you were the day you first stepped on board. The wealth you fight and kill for is an illusion, a phantom. It's a tangible thing for a week or two, a heavy bag of silver that buys you fleeting pleasures, but it has no lasting substance. It can't buy you safety. It can't buy you a home. It can't buy you a future. It's just a ticket to a brief vacation from your grim reality, after which you are forced to return to the only job you know. You look around at the older pirates, the ones who have been in this life for 5, maybe 10 years. They are not wizened, wealthy retirees. They are broken men. Their bodies are maps of scars, missing teeth, and poorly healed injuries. Their hands tremble from years of alcohol abuse. Their eyes have a haunted, weary look. They are still chasing the same dream, the one big score that will finally be enough, but it's never enough. The pirate economy was, by its very nature, a dead end. The wealth they plundered was not invested. It was not used to build anything. It was immediately and violently injected back into the shadow economies of port towns, vanishing into the pockets of tavern keepers, gamblers, and merchants who were happy to sell them overpriced goods. The pirates were the producers of nothing, only the violent transfer agents of wealth, and most of that wealth flowed right through their fingers. This leads to one of the great ironies of the Golden Age of Piracy. These men who styled themselves as rebels, as kings of their own floating domains, were in fact trapped in a brutal, unforgiving cycle of poverty and violence. They would risk everything to seize a fortune, only to squander it in a way that left them with no choice but to go back to sea and risk it all again. They had escaped the wage slavery of a merchant ship only to enter a different, more volatile, but equally inescapable economic trap. There's a fascinating, little-known aspect of pirate treasure that adds another layer to this futility, the problem of unusable plunder. Sometimes pirates would capture cargo that was incredibly valuable, but almost impossible for them to sell. For instance, they might capture a ship carrying a huge consignment of fine English wool. This was worth a fortune in the right market. But what was a pirate crew going to do with it? They couldn't just sail into Boston or London and open a shop. Their access to legitimate markets was almost non-existent. More often than not, such valuable but impractical goods were simply used by the crew, leading to the comical image of rough pirates wearing fancy silks and lace, or even thrown overboard to make room for more practical plunder like rum or weapons. Their inability to liquidate their assets was a major, often overlooked, economic handicap. Historians continue to debate the ultimate motivations of pirates. Was it truly about getting rich, or was it just the justification for a lifestyle that was really about something else? Some scholars, influenced by thinkers like Peter Lamborn Wilson and his concept of temporary autonomous zones, argue that piracy was a form of radical social rebellion. They argue that the goal wasn't wealth, but the creation of a space, however temporary, that operated completely outside the laws and norms of conventional society. In this view, the freedom of the pirate life, with its democratic structure and rejection of traditional authority, was the real prize. The treasure was just a means to keep that experiment afloat. But as you sit on the deck, your stomach aching with hunger, your gums sore from the onset of scurvy yet again, that intellectual argument feels hollow. Your freedom feels an awful lot like a cage. You are free from the tyranny of a single captain, but you are a slave to the tyranny of the group, a slave to your own appetites, a slave to the endless, grinding cycle of the chase. You had dreamed of a life of adventure and riches. The reality is a monotonous pendulum swinging between brutal violence and crushing boredom, between fleeting wealth and chronic poverty. The gold is a mirage in the desert. The closer you get, the more it recedes. You realize the ultimate tragedy of the pirate's life. You spend your whole existence chasing a treasure that, even when you find it, you can never truly possess. It slips through your fingers like sand, leaving you with nothing but bloody hands and the desperate need to do it all over again. The years are starting to blur. You've lost count of the ports you've visited, the ships you've taken, the men you've seen die. Your body is a testament to the life you've led. Day long, puckered scar runs down your left arm from a cutlass parry that went wrong. 2 of your fingers are stiff and don't bend properly. Your face is weathered unleathery from the sun and sea, making you look 20 years older than you are. You've become one of the old hands now, the grizzled veteran that new recruits look at with a mixture of fear and awe. But you feel no pride in this. You only feel tired. A deep, bone-deep weariness that the fiercest battle and the strongest drum cannot shake. You begin to think about the end, not in an abstract way, but as a practical, looming reality. How does a man like you leave this life? You look around at your options, and they are grim and few. The first, and perhaps most common, and for a pirate is disease. You've seen it 100 times. A man is struck down by a fever, by dysentery, by the slow, inexorable decay of scurvy. He dies in a filthy hammock. His body is sewn into a scrap of sailcloth, and he is given to the sea. It's a quiet, pathetic, and ignominious end, a final surrender to the squalor that has defined your life. There is no glory in it, only the stench of sickness and the quiet splash as you disappear forever. The second end is in battle. This is the glorious death that pirates might toast to in their cups, to die with a sword in your hand, a defiant shout on your lips. But you've seen battle up close. There is no glory in it. It's a messy, terrifying, and painful business. You could be cut down by a sword, smashed by a cannonball, or impaled by a wooden splinter. It might be quick, or it might be a slow, agonizing bleed out on a bloody deck. It's a gambler's death, and the odds are never in your favor. The third, and perhaps most feared, end is capture. The navies of the world, particularly the British Royal Navy, have begun a concerted effort to eradicate piracy. The Golden Age is tarnishing. The pirate havens are being cleaned out. The governors who once turned a blind eye in exchange for a share of the loot are now offering pardons or, more often, bounties. The sea is becoming smaller, more dangerous. To be captured means to be put in chains, thrown into the dark, stinking hold of a naval vessel, and transported to a major colonial port like Jamaica, Charleston, or London for trial. The trials are a shame. You are a pirate. Your guilt does predate torment. the sentence is always the same: death by hanging. The hanging itself is a public spectacle, a piece of state-sponsored theater designed to terrify any other would-be pirates in the crowd. You would be taken to a place like Execution Dock on the banks of the Thames. You'd be allowed a final speech, a chance to confess your sins or offer a last defiant curse. Then the noose would be placed around your neck, the cart pulled away, and you would be left to dangle, slowly strangling to death. It was not a quick neck's nap. It was a slow, agonizing strangulation. The final, public humiliation, as a special deterrent for pirates. Their bodies were often not cut down, but were instead coated in tar and hung in iron cages called gibbets at the entrance to harbors, left to rot as a gruesome warning to all who sailed past. This grim fate of being gibbeted is a point of some historical contention. How common was it? Really, while the most famous pirates like Captain Kidd were gibbeted, the practice was expensive and laborious. Some historians argue it was reserved for only the most notorious pirate captains to make a powerful statement. Others suggest it was more common, a standard part of the state's anti-piracy propaganda machine. For the common pirate, a simple hanging under burial in an unmarked grave was the more likely, if no less final, end. Is there any other way out? The king's pardon is sometimes offered. A blanket amnesty for pirates who willingly surrender by a certain date. Some men take it, but it's a risky proposition. Many pirates don't trust the authorities, fearing it's a trap, and even if you receive the pardon, what then? You are a known pirate. You have no skills other than sailing and fighting. You are often broke. Many who took the pardon found themselves unable to find work and quickly returned to their old life, sealing their fate. The final option is the one every pirate dreams of, but almost none achieve: to simply disappear, to pull off one last, massive score, enough to truly set you up for life, and then vanish, change your name, and buy a quiet farm somewhere no one knows your past. This is the pirate fantasy, the happy ending, but it's just that, a fantasy. You've never known a man who managed it. The lure of one more prize, the difficulty of liquidating your assets, the impossibility of truly escaping your reputation, it all conspires to keep you in the life until the life itself kills you. You stand at the rail, watching the sun set. You are no longer the naive boy who thought this was a grand adventure. You are a survivor, but you are also a prisoner with a death sentence, waiting for the executioner. Your final harbor will not be a peaceful port, but a watery grave, a bloody deck, or a hangman's noose. The end comes, as it so often does, not with a bang, but with a whimper. You are not caught in a glorious sea battle against a mighty naval frigate. You are not betrayed by a mutinous crewmate in a climactic struggle. You were captured in a tavern. Your ship had limped into a small, semi-respectable port to take on water and make repairs. The crew, as always, descended upon the local drinking holes with a desperate thirst. You are sitting in a dark, smoky corner, nursing a cup of cheap ale, when the doors burst open. It's not a press gang. It's the local militia, armed with muskets and acting on a tip from a governor who is no longer friendly to your kind. The fight is a pathetic, drunken brawl that lasts less than a minute. Most of the crew, including you, are too surprised and too drunk to offer any real resistance. You are clubbed to the ground, your hands bound tightly behind your back, and dragged out into the street. The dream is over. The trial is exactly the farce you knew it would be. You and your surviving crewmates are paraded before a bewigged magistrate who looks at you with a mixture of contempt and fascination. A few former victims are brought in to testify against you. The evidence is overwhelming. The verdict is a foregone conclusion. You are sentenced to hang. You spend your last days in a stone cell, damp and cold, a stark contrast to the wooden world you've inhabited for so long. The finality of it all begins to sink in. You think back on your life, the years of brutality, filth, and terror, the fleeting moments of wild, intoxicating freedom, the faces of the men you killed and the men you watched die. Was it worth it? You remember the reasons you joined this life. You were fleeing a different kind of prison, a life of crushing poverty, of thankless labor, of rigid, suffocating authority. The pirate ship, for all its horrors, offered an alternative. It offered a vote. It offered a share. It offered a brief, shining moment where you, a disposable man from the bottom rung of society, could feel powerful. This is the central paradox of the Golden Age of Piracy, the question historians still grapple with. Were pirates simply maritime terrorists, a scourge on legitimate commerce, or were they a form of primitive social rebellion, a social banditry of the sea? As the historian Marcus Rediker has argued, Rediker and others in his school of thought see pirates as rebels against the oppressive conditions of merchant and naval ships, creating a unique, multicultural, and surprisingly democratic society in defiance of the capitalist and imperialist powers of their day. Other historians push back, arguing this view romanticizes what were, in essence, violent, self-interested criminals whose primary motivation was greed, not political ideology. As you stand on the gallows, a rough hem probe scratching your neck, you don't feel like a political rebel. You don't feel like a monster. You just feel like a man who made a series of desperate choices and ran out of luck. You look out at the crowd that has gathered to watch you die. You see a sea of faces, a mix of curiosity, fear, and morbid excitement. In their eyes, you are a story, a legend, a monster from the deep. You are the Jolly Roger personified. They don't see the reality. They don't see the crawling biscuits, the slimy water, the rotting gums of scurvy. They don't hear the screams of a man being flogged or the grating sound of a surgeon's saw. They don't smell the stench of the bilge or the cloying odor of gangrene. They don't feel the crushing boredom, the gnawing paranoia, or the hollow emptiness after a battle. They only see the myth. The so-called Golden Age was never golden for the men who lived it. It was an age of iron and blood, of rust and drought. It was a short, brutal, and desperate period in history, a violent spasm born out of the harsh conditions of the time. You were a part of it. You lived it. And now, you will die for it. The executioner asks if you have any last words. You think for a moment. What could you say that would capture the truth of it all? What could you say that they would understand? You decide against it. You just shake your head. There's nothing left to say. The world you knew is gone, and the world that remains has no place for you. You close your eyes and wait for the drop, the final end to a life lived on the savage, unforgiving edge of the world. The world doesn't go black. It simply softens. The jeering of the crowd fades into a gentle hum, like the distant sound of the sea. The rough, scratching rope around your neck seems to dissolve, replaced by the familiar weight of a warm, heavy blanket. The harsh light of the sun gives way to a soft, welcoming darkness, the kind you see behind your eyelids just before sleep takes hold. All the sharp edges of your life begin to blur. The fear, the hunger, the pain, they're all just memories now. And even memories are beginning to feel distant, like a story someone else told you a long time ago. The faces of your crewmates, once so vivid, now drift like smoke, their harsh laughter and desperate shouts melting into the quiet murmur of the night. You can feel yourself floating, not in the cold, unforgiving ocean, but in a calm, warm, and peaceful tide. The constant, rocking motion of the ship is gone, replaced by a profound stillness. The aches in your bones are soothed. The gnawing anxiety in your gut has finally uncoiled. There are no more sails to mend, no more decks to swab, no more enemies on the horizon. The long, difficult voyage is finally over. You have reached a safe harbor at last, a place of deepened, dreamless rest.